It started with a knock. Not urgent. Not timid. Just final. Julia's hand hovered over the encrypted phone. Matte black, screen dark, no brand, no OS, just silence. She never heard it ring. It never should rung. But it vibrated earlier that morning, once, and then nothing. That was enough to change everything. From the hallway, a voicemail, low and unsure, said, "We need to talk about what you've done." Julia didn't answer. Her breathing was tight, and her jaw trembled, though her face was stone. Outside, headlights painted moving shadows on her living room wall. The voice came again. "They know." One beat. "You went invisible." Not really. That was the first fracture. Not the voice itself, not the words, but the knowledge that someone had been watching her all along. Julia's fingers wrapped tightly around the phone. She had paid to disappear. But someone had followed the echo. The encrypted device had never been safe. Just quiet. And now, its silence was screaming. Julia didn't speak. The hallway was silent again, but the damage had already begun. In her chest, something twisted. Familiar dread returning like muscle memory. She backed away from the door, slow and silent, eyes fixed on the handle. Every step took her deeper into a space that no longer felt like hers. And that phone, that promise of untraceability, was her lifeline. Until it wasn't. She thought about the man's words. They know. Who were they? And what exactly did they know? Her mind jumped to encrypted chats, late-night calls, GPS cloaks she'd toggled obsessively. She had paid in cash. Never reused an IP. Bought burner after burner. So how? Her back hit the kitchen counter. She froze. The only sound was the old fridge humming like static in a phone call. You can't end. It was no longer about the device. It was about the trust she had placed in silence. And the silence had betrayed her. The phone vibrated again. Once. No message. No caller ID. Just that single hum, like a warning bell in the bones. Julia almost dropped it. Her thumbs hovered, unsure whether to swipe or throw it out the window. She stared at the dark screen. No light. No name. But it was not dead. It was waiting. Her pulse surged in her ears. She had been so careful. Deleted logs. Reflashed firmware. Triple-layered VPN tunneling with relay jumps. Kind of steps you only take if you're hiding something or hiding from someone. But even paranoia has rules. Julia was realizing she hadn't written the rules. Someone else had. And they'd been watching. She didn't answer the call. Instead, she slipped the phone into a steel sugar canister and shut the lid, then turned up the faucet and let the sink run. Noise. Any noise. She wasn't scared of being caught. She was terrified that she never actually left. Years ago she'd made a choice: vanish. Not in the romantic, fresh start kind of way. In the kind of way that meant changing names, burning bridges, and forgetting birthdays. The encrypted phone was supposed to be the last layer. No SIM. No Nuwanged. No Yi. No GPS. No link to any life that had once mattered. But she never counted on curiosity being the thing that would undo her. Curiosity brought her back to forums. Chat threads. Old usernames. Just a peek, she told herself. And maybe they were waiting. Maybe they'd always been. The problem with using something untraceable is you start believing you can't be found. But someone had found her. And now that knock, that voice, was proof. Julia's past wasn't behind her. It was tracking her in real time. Her fingers moved without thinking, reaching for the false bottom of a kitchen drawer. Beneath stacked menus and utensils was a second device, wrapped in foil, old, scratched, heavier in the hand than she remembered. It had never been used. It was her fallback plan. If the encrypted phone failed, this one would burn the last bridge. She looked at it and felt nothing. Just resolve. She turned it on. No boot-up sound. Just static. A number already queued for dialing. One she didn't remember programming. Her thumb hovered. She wanted to believe it was all paranoia, that the man outside wasn't there for her. But the phone told a different story. Some truths can't be erased, only buried. And even then, they whisper through metal and circuits. Julia didn't sleep. She sat on the floor with her back against the kitchen cabinets, knees pulled to her chest, both phones beside her like coiled snakes. Her eyes didn't blink often. Just stared ahead, not at anything, but through everything. Somewhere around 6 a.m., the sky began to lighten. A cold, gray light spilled into the apartment, and the world looked cleaner than it was. She remembered the silence of her father's garage, the smell of oil, dust, copper wire. He'd told her once, the most secure thing is the thing no one knows exists. She had lived by that. Until now. Her phone chimed again. Not a call. A message. No sender ID. Just a single word. Enough. That word didn't say she'd been found. It said she'd been watched. For longer than she understood. Julia's face didn't change. Her heart did. She felt it sink so deep inside her chest, it might never come back up. She left the apartment just after 7. Hoodie up. Body. What? Sunglasses on. One of the phones stayed behind. The other, the older one, was pocketed. She knew cameras would catch her. Stairwell, street corner, metro station. But she also knew how to blend. Julia walked with the practiced indifference of someone who has disappeared before. Her expression was unreadable, but her movements were precise. Each step, each glance, calculated. She stopped at a corner cafe, ordered nothing, sat at the furthest table near the window. Waited. What? The burner vibrated once. Not a call. A location drop. Dot. No number. Just coordinates. She copied them to memory, then crushed the phone inside a napkin dispenser with a solid press. No panic. No noise. She stood, walked out, and didn't look back. Whatever was waiting there, wherever there was, she had to see it. Some answers don't come from questions. They come from following shadows. The coordinates led to an industrial park outside the city, empty on Sundays, washed in concrete gray. Julia walked alone down a row of shuttered garages, her steps echoing. A drone buzzed somewhere overhead, too far to see. She didn't flinch. Unit 9BB. The door was cracked open. Inside it was dark, cold. Kind of dark that eats noise. The walls were lined with gear, monitors, cables, antenna arrays, all humming low like a sleeping beast. In the center, a table with photos. Her. From months ago. Different cities. Different hairstyles. One in Paris. One outside a hospital in Baltimore. One taken from inside her apartment window. She didn't speak. She didn't move. There was nothing to say. The message was clear. She hadn't been followed. She'd been owned. From the start. Julia reached for one of the photos. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but rage. How had they gotten this close? How long had they been watching? She scanned the garage, cameras in corners, a small fan slowly spinning, no visible doors beyond the one she entered. Her voice, when it came, cracked like old vinyl. Why? The silence answered her. Then, a soft click. One of the monitors blinked to life. A grainy, pre-recorded video played. Her, in that same kitchen, from years ago. Laughing. Talking. Saying things she didn't remember. Then came the voice. Not hers. Not his. This is where you started lying. Her knees buckled slightly. The video shifted to her accessing a server room, off limits under a name she no longer used. It wasn't surveillance. It was evidence. And she wasn't being hunted. She was being prepared. She left the garage slowly, the photos clutched tightly in her hand. Outside, the wind had picked up. It carried dust and silence with it. She didn't look back. There was no point. The truth wasn't inside the building. It was in the quiet precision of what she'd just seen. Someone had built this around her. Not just surveillance. Not just tracking. A dossier. A case. Maybe a story waiting to be told to someone else. Julia walked for miles before she finally spoke. Not to anyone. Just to herself. They were never trying to catch me. They were waiting for me to remember. That was the thing about vanishing. You forget why you ran. You lose track of the lie you used to survive. And when the truth comes back, it doesn't knock. It sends coordinates. Julia didn't go home. Home wasn't safe. Maybe it never had been. She found herself in an abandoned subway tunnel, one she'd memorized years ago as a contingency. Graffiti stained the walls like bruises, and the sound of distant trains echoed like ghosts. She sat on a rusted bench, unfolded the photos from the garage, and laid them out on the concrete floor. One stood out. The one outside the hospital. Not because of her, but because of a man standing behind her, mid-step, half blurred. She knew that face. Not from life, but from surveillance. He was one of the watchers. Always behind. Always silent. She circled his face with her pen. This wasn't about escape anymore. It was about understanding. And if understanding required confrontation, she was ready. Let's see who's really watching who, she whispered. She returned to the city, not to hide but to dig. At a public library terminal, she logged in using a stolen identity, one she hadn't used since Prague. She cross-referenced security logs, hospital records, and satellite pings. Her fingers moved fast. The man from the photo, his face came up once, under a foundation grant for data ethics research. A shell. Nothing else. She moved deeper, routing through 3 proxy networks, breaking a digital trail she had once sworn never to touch again. Finally, she found it. A private server linked to encrypted biometric archives. She tapped in. It required a key phrase. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed, "They know." The screen flickered. Access granted. What she found wasn't a file. It was a folder. Dozens of names. Faces. Logs. Date. Notes. She wasn't the only one. Just the only one left who hadn't been turned. She printed nothing. Took no screenshots. Just memorized what she could. Every name. Every file. Then she wiped the terminal, left no trace. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious. Julia stood in a crowd of people at an intersection, the data echoing in her head like static. She wasn't scared anymore. She was furious. These weren't just victims. They were subjects. The program wasn't surveillance. It was testing. Control. Shaping behavior under the illusion of privacy. She looked up at the security camera mounted on the streetlight. Her own reflection blinked in its lens. "You don't get to watch anymore," she said. She pulled out her last clean device, a modified signal jammer, and activated it. A sharp hiss filled her ear. The signal around her went dead. For the first time in months, she was truly off-grid. And she would use that silence to make noise. She broke into an old contact's office, Vin, a digital forensics analyst she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. His place hadn't changed, monitors stacked like towers, air heavy with solder and caffeine. He wasn't there. But his systems were. She bypassed his security with an old passphrase he never updated. Prometheus. Fitting. No. Inside she uploaded a ghost build of the archive, an exact mirror of the server she'd seen. Names, locations, timestamps. Not to the cloud, not to the dark web. To something deeper. A whisper network. One designed not to go viral, but to go surgical. She knew Vin would find it when he came back. He'd know what it meant. He'd know what to do. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about revelation. Julia turned off the lights, left no note. Only the truth, and a trail she didn't plan to follow. By morning, she was on a rooftop overlooking the city. It was quiet up there above the noise. She watched the sun rise like it hadn't missed her. The encrypted phone was gone. The burner, smashed. The jammer, depleted. She had no devices left. Just the photos in her pocket and names burned into her memory. She'd spent years thinking she was in hiding. But she wasn't hiding. She was sleeping. Now, she was awake. The city moved below her. Sirens, taxis, morning joggers, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Because somewhere, someone else had seen that server. Someone else was waking up. The control wasn't complete. It had cracks. And Julia? Julia was going to pry them wide open. Her breath misted in the early light. She whispered to no one, "Now it's my turn to watch." Julia didn't run anymore. She walked directly into the lion's mouth. The headquarters for Synapse Systems was all glass and steel, anonymity disguised as legitimacy. She passed through the revolving doors like she belonged there. No ID badge. No hesitation. The receptionist blinked, unsure, as Julia breezed past security and stepped into the elevator. She knew the floor. Knew the layout. She had walked it once under a different name. On the ride up, her reflection in the mirrored wall stared back without blinking. Floor 27. The heart of the operation. She stepped out and walked straight to the server room door. A guard moved to intercept. "You're not authorized." Julia raised her hands. "I'm already inside," she said. His confusion gave her seconds. She was betting that seconds were enough. Every system has a back door. And sometimes, the back door wears a hoodie and walks in through the front. The server room was colder than she remembered, air-conditioned to preserve the lie. Lights blinked in rhythmic precision across hundreds of black towers. Julia moved fast, ducking low, weaving between aisles. She wasn't here to steal data. She was here to kill it. She pulled the modified drive from her coat. It didn't extract. It infected. A silent worm, coded years ago during her exile. It wouldn't trigger alerts. It would just spread. Slowly. Undetectably. Until everything they built was dust. She plugged it in. Lights blinked. The hum changed pitch, like a living thing suddenly aware it was dying. Her eyes scanned the racks, knowing this wasn't just revenge. It was erasure. Not of her past. Of theirs. The structure that had hidden them. Enabled them. Her fingers hovered over the final command. No passwords. No firewalls. Just silence. And then she pressed execute. The worm began its crawl. Julia watched lines of code ripple across the nearest terminal, like water breaking through a dam. Files collapsed in on themselves, metadata folding, biometric logs erasing, behavioral profiles scrambling. She didn't smile. There was no satisfaction. Only breath. Only motion. Then, a screen changed. Not code. A video. Live feed. A man, suited, mid-40s, seated in a conference room. Watching her. "We knew you'd come," he said. His voice echoed through a hidden speaker. Julia froze. "You think this ends the program?" he asked. "You were part of it, Julia. You still are." Her pulse didn't spike. She just stood there, absorbing it. No threat. No panic. Just reality shifting again. "You're not deleting us," he continued. "You're confirming the next version." Her eyes narrowed. Maybe it wasn't a trap. Maybe it was a test. Julia pulled the drive, severing the worm midstream. Sparks flickered briefly. An act of defiance, not failure. She walked calmly from the server room, not rushing, not hiding. Outside the glass walls, a red light pulsed, alarm without sound. She had triggered something. Not the system's collapse. Its awakening. She passed the same guard in the hallway. This time, he stepped aside. The elevator ride down was quiet. She looked up into the mirrored ceiling and whispered, "They made me the weapon." When she stepped into the lobby again, no one stopped her. Not because she'd succeeded, but because success was irrelevant. She'd entered their system, touched their core, and left her fingerprint on their data. They wanted her to walk out. But not for victory. For study. Hey. For proof that control wasn't about confinement. It was about consent. Outside, the city was buzzing. But she felt disconnected from it, as if she were watching from inside glass. She sat on a park bench across the street, watching the Synapse building reflect the rising sun. In her hand, a second drive, clean, untouched. The worm wasn't the payload. It was the decoy. The real virus had been uploaded in the background, via a terminal they didn't know was live. Not revenge. Not sabotage. Evolution. She had rewritten their system. Subtly. Quietly. With her own algorithms embedded like spores in their DNA. It wouldn't break them. Not yet. But it would change them. Slowly. Without permission. "They wanted me to walk out," she said aloud. "Good. Now let's see what I walked out with." She slipped the real drive into her pocket, stood, and walked into the crowd like a ghost rediscovering how to haunt. Julia boarded a train heading south, the kind that doesn't check IDs if you pay in cash. She sat near the back by the window, watching the scenery blur into motion sickness. The drive was warm in her pocket. Not from heat, but from consequence. She hadn't told anyone. Not even the whisper networks. Not even Vin. That was the point. This part had to be hers. A boy sat across the aisle playing with a cracked tablet, eyes flicking toward her curiously. Julia smiled faintly. The kind you offer when you're not sure if you're still a person. The train hit a tunnel, and for a moment everything went dark. Then her phone buzzed. Not the old one. Not even a burner. A new device. Unregistered. Untouched. It shouldn't have been possible. And yet, on the screen was a message. One line. Just 5 words. "She was never your sister." Julia sat frozen. The message rewrote her memory in real time. Her sister, dead since the incident in Lyon. Or so she believed. But now the cracks deepened. Memories returned, slightly off. Her sister's apartment had no personal items. No photos. Her emails were always vague. Emotionally flat. Were they written by her? Were they ever real? Julia remembered a night, years ago, when a man approached her in Berlin claiming to know what happened in Marseille. She dismissed him. Now she wondered if he was warning her. Her sister had been the catalyst for her disappearance. But what if she wasn't missing? What if she never existed as Julia believed? The encrypted phone hadn't failed her. It had shown her what the silence was hiding. And the silence was designed. Julia wasn't the fugitive. She was the experiment. And her sister was the control. She reached the end of the train line just after midnight. The station was empty, echoing. She sat beneath a flickering platform light, replaying the message again and again. The name at the top wasn't a number. It was just a word. Admin. She knew that name. It wasn't just the sender, it was the author. Of everything. Admin had been the gatekeeper of the encrypted devices, the dead forums, the layered onion routing networks she once trusted. She thought it was a system. But what if it was a person? Or worse, a mask worn by many. She sent a single word in reply. Why? The response came instantly, because you believed her. And belief is the first vulnerability. Julia dropped the phone onto the concrete and backed away. It rang. No caller ID. No sound, just vibration like a pulse. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. She finally understood. They hadn't tracked her. They had written her. It all unraveled backward. Lyon. Berlin. What? Marseille. The apartment that never had mail. the voice that never broke over the phone. Even the encrypted device itself, sent to her not requested. Planted. It had never been protection. It was a narrative vector, disguised as privacy. Every move Julia made, every attempt to vanish, was scripted in advance. Synapse hadn't just watched. They authored. Her rebellion had been a forecast. Her choices, probabilities. Her resistance, anticipated and encouraged. Not a leak in their system. A test of it. She thought she'd broken free, but she had only proven how far control could extend undetected. She stared at the skyline, dizzy with the weight of it. Her face reflected in the train station glass didn't look like hers anymore. "What am I?" she asked aloud. But no one answered. Maybe no one ever had. Julia returned to her apartment for the first time in weeks. Not to reclaim it, but to destroy it. She didn't pack. She didn't pause. She opened every drawer, exposed every hiding place, tore the lining from the walls. She found more than she expected. Bugs. Micromics. Backdoor sensors hardwired into the sockets. They hadn't just watched her, they had lived inside her space. Every word she whispered, every silence she kept, had been recorded. Not for surveillance, for study. Julia dropped the photos, the drives, the remnants of the lie into the kitchen sink, and lit a match. The flame took quickly, greedily. As it grew, so did her understanding. This wasn't about freedom. It was about refusal. She couldn't undo what they'd written. But she could make the next page blank. Or maybe, she thought, she could start writing it herself. Julia stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. Not just physically, though the exhaustion showed in her shoulders, in the cracks beneath her eyes, but something deeper. Her expression was blank, but her eyes burned. This wasn't fear anymore. It was rage, in its final, clearest form. She opened a concealed panel beneath the floorboards. Inside was an analog radio transmitter. Old analog, untraceable, once meant for emergency contact. She turned it on. Static. 91. Then, a signal tone. She keyed in the only frequency that mattered. The one no one was supposed to know. She spoke into the mic. "I know what you did. I know what I am. And I'm not playing your game anymore." She paused, breathing hard, her voice low and shaking. "If you're listening, come find me. But I'm not hiding." It wasn't a message. It was a declaration of war. The response didn't come through the radio. It came in the form of silence, an entire city block gone dark within minutes. Power outage, no headlines, no sirens, just darkness where light should be. Julia moved through it like smoke, flashlight in hand, steps soundless. She knew they were watching. Infrared, satellite, maybe even thermal imaging drones. But she also knew the blind spots, the places just outside their net. A stairwell beneath the old church. A ventilation tunnel behind the defunct courier hub. She wasn't running. She was ascending. This time she would face them in the place they believed untouchable. And as she climbed, she whispered to herself, not prayers, not strategy, but memories. Not hers. The ones they gave her. She was going to return them. All of them. With fire, if she had to. She reached the top of the abandoned telecom tower just before dawn. A place once meant for signal, now the center of silence. The sky behind her began to crack open with light, and in front of her a figure stood waiting. The man from the photo. The one always behind her. No weapons. No words. Just standing, as if this had all been an appointment. "You created this," Julia said. He nodded, almost gently. "We curated it." She stepped closer, fists clenched. "You erased my sister." His voice was calm. "She was never erased, just never real. You needed a reason to run." Julia's scream cracked the air. She lunged, hit him, hard. He didn't fall. He didn't flinch. "You're not angry at me," he said. "You're angry you believed it." And that's when she broke. Not from weakness, but from truth snapping inside her like bone. Because he was right. He didn't fight back. That was the most devastating part. Julia struck again, yelling, tears now cutting down her dirt-streaked face. "You built me. You built all of this." The man just watched her, eyes unreadable. "No," he said. "You built yourself. We just gave you the mirror." She stopped, gasped, looked around, the skyline distant, the tower trembling in the wind. "Then why?" she asked. "Why the lies?" His reply landed like a wound. "Because truth without belief is useless, and belief needs pain." She fell to her knees. Not because she was weak, but because the story she'd carried all this time, her sister, the phone, the escape, was gone. A fiction. Crafted. Precise. She had never been running from them. She had been running toward them. Toward the part of herself she never wanted to see. He left her there. Just walked past, disappearing down the stairwell, leaving Julia alone on the tower. Not victorious. Not defeated. Just stripped. The wind howled across the steel rails. She sat at the edge, legs dangling into the rising sun. There was no next move. No agenda. The encrypted phone, the data, even the system itself. None of it mattered now. What mattered was this: they had made her believe she had agency. And maybe she did. But only inside the box they built. Her entire wall had been inside their rules. And yet, she was still here. Not as their subject, but as something they hadn't planned for. Julia stood, took the small drive from her coat and dropped it into the abyss. It tumbled into the fog below. Gone. "You wrote my life?" she said aloud. "But I'm writing the ending." She turned and walked down, one step at a time. Julia didn't return to the city. She moved through back roads, small towns, unnamed intersections. No phone. No tech. Just a bag, a map, and her own mind. Each motel room felt like a neutral zone, nothing to betray her, nothing to reclaim. She no longer looked for cameras in vents or microphones in walls. She expected them, but they no longer controlled her. What they'd taken could never be returned. Her past. Her sister. Her own sense of origin. But what remained couldn't be stolen, her decision to keep going. There was no peace in that. No justice. But there was motion. And sometimes that was enough. One morning, in a town with no name on the highway map, she looked at her reflection in a cafe window. And for the first time she didn't flinch. "I was never invisible," she said to herself. "I was rewritten." Then she walked on. In a library no one visited, deep in the archive basement, Julia placed a sealed envelope on a forgotten shelf. Inside, names, coordinates, code fragments. Not everything, but enough. She wasn't uploading it. Not broadcasting it. Just leaving it. A breadcrumb. For someone like she used to be. Someone searching. Someone who still believed they were alone. She didn't want fame or retribution. She wanted the cycle interrupted. Quietly. Irreversibly. She left no note, no fingerprint. Just information buried where only the truly desperate would find it. The kind of people they weren't expecting. Let them make another version of me, she thought. Let her be smarter. As she walked back up the stairs, the fluorescent lights hummed. She didn't look back. You only plant a seed once. After that you let the ground do its work. Months passed. Or maybe years. Time no longer felt linear. Julia lived by pattern, not calendar, never staying long, always watching. Sometimes she saw signs that others had found her trail. A phrase scrawled on a wall in the code she used. A proxy server lighting up in a remote node she'd buried. Proof that her message, fragmented though it was, had taken root. But she never tried to connect. That wasn't her role anymore. She was the myth now. The story others whispered when the encrypted phone buzzed without warning. The warning they wished they'd listened to sooner. Julia sat on a bench in a city park as the sun dipped low. She watched people walk by, busy, distracted, unknowing. She didn't envy them. But she didn't pity them either. Some truths are too heavy to carry forever. So she simply sat and let the world forget her. One night, as rain tapped the roof of a rural safe house, Julia dreamed of her sister, not the real one, but the version she had believed in. In the dream, they sat on a dock, feet in water, laughing. Nothing about it was accurate. The faces were wrong. The voices borrowed. But the feeling? That was real. And when Julia woke, she didn't cry. She simply whispered, "Thank you." The sister hadn't been a lie. She had been a framework. A compass pointing her away from comfort and toward truth. Not every illusion is a trap. Some are bridges. She stood, packed her few belongings, and walked into the rain. She didn't need forgiveness. She didn't need answers. She just needed to keep moving. Not to escape, but to honor the path the illusion had made possible. She stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean, the wind tearing at her coat, waves crashing below in rhythmic fury. In her hand a scrap of the original printed code, the first line of the encryption protocol that had started it all. She read it once more, then let it go. The paper lifted, danced, then vanished into the air. She closed her eyes. Not to forget, but to mark the moment. Julia didn't win. She didn't lose. She endured. And in a world built on surveillance and manipulation, survival itself was rebellion. Her voice, carried by wind and salt and memory, said one final thing, so quiet the world almost missed it. I gave her away. Not her sister. Herself. The version they wanted. The version they watched. That version was gone now. And what remained would never be found.